Welcome back, college basketball fans, to another Hoops HD report. I'm your host, Chad Sherwood, joined by Joby Fortson, David Griggs,
Yes.
Rocco Miller from Bracketeer.org, John Teitel down below as well. Almost a full panel of Hoops HD experts here for us this
Yes,
week.
I am here.
And David.
I am the expert. What would you like to discuss? What would you like my expertise on, Chad?
This is the podcast where we discuss all the news and notes among the major conferences and all the goings on in college basketball. We've got a lot to get to as we are coming off of one of maybe the best weekend of college basketball we've had all season, which is something to say when we're almost at the end of the season here, but an amazing weekend.
About that, then you have people say, what a great weekend. Can't we start the tournament now? And I'm like, are you not entertained with the season? I mean, we don't – let's just – I don't want to start now. We might miss another weekend like last weekend.
Well, we got a lot to get to, but I've been starting off these shows recently with blind resumes, and I think it's time to start with one more blind resume this week. And I'm going to pull up here on the screen in a second. And without necessarily guessing which teams these are, just the general question is, which profile do you like better? We got a team on the left there with, it looks like, 5 wins among the top 2 quadrants, including 4 of those 5 being on the road. A team on the right with maybe a little bit more in the top 2, but more home and neutral. Teitel, you're our selection committee guessing expert. Do you like one of these profiles better? Do you think they're about the same? What are your thoughts on these?
I know who the left one is.
They seem pretty similar. One of the metrics that jumps out to me, as I mentioned many times last week, was non-conference strength of schedule, 11 on the right and 110 on the left. Right. As far as guessing the teams, I know, Chad, that's not your big picture.
Yeah, I know the left team too, everybody.
I think everyone does.
I selected the left team.
Some of them stand out to me.
They're not ready yet.
Left played number 1 and number 2 teams in the nation twice, which I assume are Kansas and Baylor. And somebody else on the right has played a number 2 team, either Kansas or Baylor. So I think it's a Big 12 team and somebody from the SEC Big 12 Challenge for proving.
Oh, I don't know who the one on the left is.
That is a pretty good guess. Well, Rocco, let me ask you as well, though. Is there a case that can be made that the team on the left who has the worst metrics of the two, might be close to the team on the right?
I think just the fact that they got 2 quadrant 1 road wins and then another couple in quadrant 2, whereas the team on the right just has the 1 in each column. But that's pretty picky. I do like the fact that you have the versus the board statistic up there, and that definitely favors the team on the right being 5-7 against the team on the left that's 2-10, same amount of games, 3 more wins. So I'm having a hard time not looking at that.
Yeah, and the team on the left beat Purdue, so that at 14-14, so that doesn't count.
Well,
so it's Texas.
Here's the team on the left. A team though, the team on the right, the Florida Gators, a team that has been most people's fields, and fairly solidly. But the team on the left, David, the Texas Longhorns, who just as we start this record tonight, picked up their second best win of the year with a home win over West Virginia.
Yeah, I don't think that there's enough there. At first I thought it was UCLA, and then I realized there's no way it was them after you said, no, it's not. But, the win at Oklahoma State, how much credit do you really give them for that? And this is why the committee doesn't do blind resumes. It's like you have to you have to look at things more in-depthly and do an actual analysis instead of just doing trivia like top 50, top 100 road, all of that stuff. But Oklahoma State, it's never easy to beat anyone on the road, but honestly, I think TCU's been better at home than Okie State this year, despite
they won at TCU also, David. So.
Yeah, I know. I was just making the point that even though that's not a quadrant 1 win, you don't really give them a whole lot of credit for winning at Oklahoma State.
Well, let me ask this question. Texas coming off this win that we just saw before we started the recording. And Teitel, let me ask you this. The remaining schedule, tough game this weekend at Texas Tech, but then 2 potentially winnable games. Is there a path to an at-large bid here for Shaka suddenly with this win tonight?
There's a path for anybody in the Big 12 because in the conference tourney, you'll get a chance at Kansas and or Baylor again. I don't know if you beat everybody but lose to Kansas or Baylor in the semis, if that's going to be enough meat on the bone, as we like to say. But there is a path in any big major conference because you're playing major teams.
And of course, when we're talking Big 12, let's start right there. We got to also talk about the game that happened
I've
that
got it
happened this
DVR.
weekend.
Don't spoil it for me.
Bedlam?
No, I was not talking about Bedlam. That was a blow up by Oklahoma
That was
State.
an evisceration. Is called that.
But Joby, if you wanted to start with Bedlam, we could start there, I guess.
Oh boy, well, Oklahoma, what are you doing? And this dovetails with what you're kind of hinting at. As Texas got a shot or stuff. If the bubble keeps doing what it's doing, I mean, it's like, hey, we're a bubble team. Okay, you're going to lose this week to a team not in the tournament typically. I mean, it's like, it's crazy. We'll talk throughout this podcast about it. Oklahoma wasn't really on the bubble, but now they are getting pretty darn close. It's like teams aren't finishing. And so if you got a team like Texas who's going to go out and finish, they actually might have a shot, because Oklahoma – now all of a sudden, I'm glad you pulled up their resume. West Virginia, good win, just like
same thing Texas did. Yeah.
But and at Texas, but the fact of the matter is, they don't have the meat on the bone. Just as Titel was saying earlier, they have the same issue Texas has. They're a little better, I think, but the Minnesota neutral win might be a swing to their column, because I think that's but I don't know, Purdue. It's 1.5. That's 6 half dozen the other, but. It's pretty interesting. We're going to, Oklahoma is in most people's brackets. Should have maybe been who the blind resume was. I think they are slightly ahead of Texas, but not by much. And the loss was big.
But let's keep things rolling here. And Titel, I know you want to discuss the real game that I meant to discuss at the top of the show here. Kansas at Baylor on Saturday, the battle of the top two teams in the nation.
Game of the year, arguably 3-point win on the road for the Jayhawks. They're now 24-3, tied with the Bears atop the conference standings, playing as we speak to go ahead of them on Monday night. They have 3 winnable games ahead. They go to Texas Tech to finish the regular season, which is going to be very tough, I think. Since the huge fight with Kansas State, 9-0, they have the rematch coming up in Manhattan on Saturday. I think that crowd is going to be in a frenzy, as you might imagine. Udoka Azubuike just unstoppable against Baylor. 23 points, 19 boards, leading a great interior defense. Top 5 in the nation, allowing only 42% from 2-point range. David McCormack, 6'10". He was 1 of 4 from the free throw line against Milwaukee back in December. Since then, he's taken 22. He's made all 22.
Yeah.
Rocco, look at that.
Rocco, we're now at a spot where Kansas is 1 and Baylor is 2 overall, but they both won on the opposing team's home court. Did the polls have it right? Is Kansas really over Baylor now?
I think so. I put Kansas as the number 1 overall seed in my bracket this morning. I know that Baylor has 1 fewer loss, but I think if you look at the quality of victories, Kansas now with 11 quadrant 1 wins, Baylor with 10. It's really splitting hairs. But I think also the fact that they've won 18 games over the top 2 quadrants to Baylor's 15. And not only that, just the number 1 non-conference strength of schedule versus the number 193 non-conference strength of schedule for Baylor. I know I'm not thinking like the voters think, but that's from the bracketology perspective why I think Kansas is deserving, plus just 11 wins over the board to Baylor's 8 as well. So a lot of scales have tipped to Kansas.
I'll tell you, those metrics are pretty impressive. I don't know if I've ever seen that. Every single metric, including the strength of schedules, is a 1, except I don't know what the heck the BPI is doing, having them at number 2.
But they don't have Baylor number 1.
The other thing, 18 games against the board. That is incredible. I mean, you're talking about Baylor, who's a 1 seed, Dayton, who's a 2 seed, most likely winning away from home there.
Might be wearing white now.
Yeah, and look at their losses. A combined total of – they lose to Duke by 2 and at Villanova by 1. I mean, they are very, very close to being historically good.
Just want to really quickly qualify what it means versus the board. That means teams that either are currently projected to be in the tournament or at least under consideration. And that's quite honestly, it's my own decision on what teams are on the board or not. But basically, anybody that's seriously under consideration at this point.
And what's crazy is the East Tennessee State win's great for Kansas. Yeah. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, you even think about that.
Joby, one more team I want to quickly hit in the Big 12 is West Virginia, and I know you want to discuss them. Coming off the loss tonight and just playing like the crappy team I thought they would be, and you all told me I was wrong about at the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I mean, West Virginia is starting to really they have already lost since it's like the announcement of the pre-seed happened. And they've just said, "Oh, great, we don't have to play anymore." And they've really, I mean, Texas dominated them tonight. It wasn't, Texas won that game, and it wasn't this is back and forth. Oh, too bad you walked into Austin. And by the way, I've been to DK, been to the Drum. It is not an intimidating place to play. I mean, the fans are off the court.
It can be.
It is not. Yeah. And it's like they are resting on their laurels, which is not a huggy sort of type team usually, but they just aren't. They're hitting their weak spots at the wrong time. They're starting to play bad basketball for them at the wrong time. And while the resume you had up there, it doesn't show it. If you saw the schedule, just a list of their schedule in order, like calendar order, you'd be going, what in the world happened? I mean, it's like a lot, as opposed to a light switch turning on, a light switch turned off.
It's like they switched teams with UCLA.
Well, there's the upcoming schedule for the Big 12, by the way. It's a big last 2 weeks here for Texas Tech. We didn't speak much about them, but they are at Oklahoma, a team that desperately needs a win on Tuesday night. Then they host Texas, a team that desperately needs a win. Then they got at Baylor and home versus Kansas to end the season next week. So the Red Raiders, I think should feel somewhat safe at the moment, but they got a heck of a schedule.
Yeah, that is something.
But let's jump over to there's a lot of huge games. Let's talk about the team that had been number 3 in the nation. And Titel, let me bring you back in here. The Zags go to BYU and lose their first West Coast Conference regular season game since 1923, I think, right?
About that time, it was amazing. BYU now 23-7 after 8 straight wins, including not just like easing by them, 13-point home win over the Zags. They already have a season split with St. Mary's, so I think that I assume they're going to play them again in the WCC semis. That game's a coin flip. I know BYU has the advantage right now, and they're trending in the right direction, but we shall see who gets the chance to play Gonzaga in the finals. 42% from behind the arc, number 1 in the nation. They win by the 3. They live by the 3. Not sure if Yoli Childs, the senior power forward, is going to be able to win the Conference Player of the Year. He missed 13 games. Having a hell of a month, though. 21.7 boards a game in his 7 games. As far as how to see them in the NCAA tourney without breaking the entire bracket.
I'm sorry, Titel, 21.7 boards or points?
21 points a game, 7 boards a game.
Oh, okay. I misunderstood. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's okay.
Thank you.
I am going to have to defer to a computer science major, though, to figure out how on earth to seed them in the NCAA tourney without breaking Chad's entire bracket.
I'll tell you, it works a lot better when you get them up to around the 6th line, which is where they may be after this 5 or 6 line. Then there was problems on the 8 line the last few weeks. We've been trying to bracket a BYU with the fact they can't play Sunday.
I don't think that's I think BYU is so clearly better than St. Mary's that I just think that.
Well,
Wow.
Rocco, let me ask you about this St. Mary's team that David wants to hate on, because he'd rather put a 15-12 Georgetown team in than a 23-6 St. Mary's team in the field right now, because he and Billy Packer probably went to the same school and how you pick teams, but
no, you just don't. Let's hear Rocco talk about St. Mary's.
I mean, the only St. Mary's game I've been to this year was when they got absolutely destroyed by Gonzaga. So I feel like I got to get out there and see them again before it's too late. But
not going to happen if you go for a home game.
Yeah, well, they're here in Santa Clara on Thursday, so I might be able to swing that. But so if you look at St. Mary's, I think they're a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde. They've got a better non-conference than we've ever seen them do. They've got 4 wins against the board if you count the BYU home win, and then 3 out-of-league wins. The Arizona State win keeps getting better every day. The Wisconsin win is obviously solid, and Utah State win is getting better every day lately too. So that's doing enough. They're over 500 in all the quadrants, and just stacking that up against the rest of the bubble, they're standing out, and they've got a good net. So they're pretty safe right now.
And I agree with Rocco, because I prefer putting a 23-win team from not one of the power conferences in over 15 and 12 teams. But
I mean, Stephen F. Austin, New Mexico State. There's lots of 23 team wins you can put in.
I read your bracket this morning, David. You decided to put Providence, Georgetown, and South Carolina in over St. Mary's. I read it.
Yes, I did. Well, I mean, it's right there. You're not really. I mean, I'm not going to deny it, but go back. to it for a second, Chad? It's just I just can't. The BYU win at home is good, but BYU currently 500 on the road. The Arizona State win came at a time when the Sun Devils hadn't really kick-started it in. To me, this game coming up against Santa Clara is a bit of a litmus test. They're not the best road team, them being St. Mary's. If they go in there and don't win that one, will you start to come around to the fact that, hey, they've lost at Pacific, they've lost at
Wait, David, I got to call you out.
Maybe this isn't what?
You said St. Mary's is not the best road team. They lost a 2-point game at BYU, who just beat Gonzaga. Their only other road loss was a quadruple overtime against Pacific. I think that's a pretty damn good road team.
Yeah, you think not when you. I mean, when you're struggling to win at San Diego and
they won. I mean, I'll say they're a bad home team. They lost to Santa Clara and Winthrop at home. I'll give you that. But no.
Okay, we'll see what they do. I mean, I'm curious to see what they do against Santa Clara.
Let's see what. And of course,
I think they need two mistakes, David, to fall out. They need to lose the Gonzaga game. Doesn't matter as far as making the tournament. Unless you win it, you're moving.
Win it, you're locked. Yeah.
right. You're a lock at that point. But if they lose, I think they almost have to lose their next 3 games to be out.
They won't do that. I mean, I think they might lose their next 2, but they're not going to.
Well,
lose.
But then if they win one game in the WCC, I think they're in because then they're playing at that point.
Oh no, everybody thinks they're in.
So I mean,
Jimmy, I think they're in. That's not my point. I don't think they should be. That's where I'm coming from.
Let's keep things moving here. We joked before the show that we're going to spend an hour on the WCC. We might be doing that if I don't keep things rolling. But let's move over to, of course, one of our favorite conferences, which was the other major game of the weekend. That, of course, is the conference. So we're talking about West. We're, of course, talking the Con Expo, Con AGG, which is only 2 weeks away now.
Yes, we need to get registered for that. Can we do that? Can we get
we'll maybe do that during next week during our video notebooks.
Yeah. But is it still going on, or did the coronavirus suspend it?
I think it's still on.
No, they're going to cure the coronavirus at this convention. It is that awesome.
Obviously, when it comes to this, Rocco, let me start with you here on the upset here with when Vegas went to San Diego State and pretty much shocked the nation on Saturday night.
Yeah, just a tremendous effort. UNLV, coached by TJ Otzelberger, a guy that I've gotten to know pretty well over the years. He was an assistant for Lorenzo Romar at Washington before he took the South Dakota State job. We all know what he did at South Dakota State. And now in his first year at UNLV, his best player is David Jenkins, who has to sit out for transfer purposes. He'll be a star next year for the team. This year, he's patched together a bunch of guys, and Elijah Mutu-Long is the guy who was the hero, one of the heroes against San Diego State. He comes in he played for Texas last year. He started his career at Mount St. Mary's, and he's been he's missed, I think, somewhere around 12 or 13 games this year, but coming on strong here lately at 19 in the game. This UNLV team is scrappy. As for San Diego State, obviously struggling a lot more at home than they do on the road. They've played exceptionally well on the road, but they had really a few scares now at home. Trailed Utah State at home, had that ridiculously close call against San Jose State back in January at home, and now they finally got bit by UNLV. So kudos to the Rebels. San Diego State obviously is human, and still a heck of a body of work though for the Aztecs.
I want to go to a couple more of you about this, Dave. I'll get to you 1 second. But first, Ty, I know you want to have a few thoughts on Vegas as well, which, when they went and trounced Colorado State on Tuesday, I kind of said, well, could something happen? But I don't think I was serious.
You couldn't have been. I mean, I love undefeated teams, and I really thought that it could happen. And, of course, I was let down. I will not repeat everything because Rocco made a bunch of great points, obviously. This team lost to Kansas State and Cal and Cincinnati in overtime each earlier this year. They win those 3 games, we might be talking about a bubble team. That being said, I don't think they're close. If they beat the Aztecs again in the conference tourney, maybe, but I think they're too far away. The Rebels,
if they beat them in the conference tourney championship game, I'll give them a good chance.
Maybe. Sadly, for me, this is the Rebels' biggest win in over 5 years. Last time was December of 2014. My Wildcats were undefeated 12-0. We blew a halftime lead in Vegas.
More on UNLV, you might not remember this, but they almost beat San Diego State the last time. It kind of makes me wonder, is this a matchup problem? And if they can jump into 5th place, which they're tied for it now, that semifinal game, assuming they get past the quarters, is in Vegas.
At the Thomas and Mack Center.
At the Thomas and Mack Center, a week early because of the ConExpo Con AGG convention. But yes, right there. But you almost have to wonder, is Vegas – I watched both games, and I've seen San Diego State. I know we all have. Is there some sort of kryptonite here matchup-wise to where San Diego State just struggles against them for whatever reason? Well, obviously they do.
Well, Joby?
Probably. I mean, that's all you can say. But let's face it, it is so tough to go undefeated. It is so tough. That's what this, I think, is more about, the matchup problems than where the game is. I think it just, at some point, someone will bring their A game when you're bringing a C game for you. And because if San Diego State, and UNLV play that game over 10 times, San Diego State probably wins 10 times. And I still think, and San Diego State is very fortunate because the other losses by potential 1 seeds, I mean, Gonzaga being one, obviously, that we discussed earlier. But it's also that next layer down. When we get to the Big Ten, we'll discuss it. When we get to the ACC, we'll discuss it. They, I think, still have a 1 seed right now, thanks to the challengers to their throne not taking advantage of it. But as when we get to the ACC, maybe there's some new people we haven't really talked about for one, that if they continue on their hot streak, maybe they can take out San Diego State. We'll see.
Well, this is the last week of Mountain West play coming up. San Diego State hosting Colorado State Tuesday night.
Yes.
Then at Nevada Saturday.
And that's a factor, too, because they're going to be stagnant, whereas other teams might be piling up good wins, especially from those power conferences.
Yeah.
Yes, and Chad, just real quick, the tournament a week early this year because of
David, it's time to move on.
But just one more, the ConExpo Con.
ConExpo Con AGG. Also, keep an eye on Utah State this week. Obviously needs these 2 wins against San Jose State and at New Mexico to keep their at-large bid hopes alive. But before we go over to some of these other power conferences, San Diego State did fall to 5 in both polls. The team that now, at least according to the AP and the coaches poll, I don't know necessarily that we're going to agree with them, but the team that should be one of the top 4 teams now, it's supposed to come out of the Atlantic 10. That's the Dayton Flyers.
Yes.
And David, let me ask you, Dayton, are they suddenly a legitimate 1 seed contender?
I don't think so. And let me qualify that. Are they good enough to be a 1 seed? Are they maybe one of the 4 best teams in the country? I think that they might be. But the one thing is, it is just they don't have a win against anybody that's going to be in the top half of the bracket, and they probably won't. Well, they just won't. So it would be a little bit unprecedented to give a 1 seed to a team that doesn't have at least one. Now, at the end of the day, what does that really mean? Like, once the tournament starts and you get past the round of 64, almost no one really thinks about seeding anyway. So I'm not saying that they don't have what it takes to go deep into the tournament once they get a 2 or a 3, probably a 2. But this is – I just don't think that it's there when you compare them to the teams on the 1 line, the teams on the 2 line. I just don't think that it's close.
Well, Rocco, what do you think? I mean, the metrics, the net says they're number 4. The KPI says they're number 3.
I think from a power ratings perspective, they belong there. I think obviously from a resume perspective, they're still behind San Diego State, and they've got a lot of the teams around them are strong ACC teams like Florida State and Duke. And then you also have the 3 Big East teams led by now Creighton and Seton Hall and Villanova, that if they get hot, win the Big East tournament, I mean, I'm probably going to you're going to have to think that they would surpass Dayton. Dayton can't do much about that except for win and hope everybody else picks up another loss, including the Aztecs. But I think if all that came together for the Flyers, they could get that last number 1. I don't think they're entirely out of the equation.
Let me ask you and Titel a question. Were you surprised when the committee gave them the 6?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was too.
I thought they
can, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're good enough to be there, and I think it helps that Bernadette's on the committee. She's the A10 commissioner, but I don't know if that's enough to sway them up to the 1 line. The 6, I think, was out of respect to their net rating and a lot of their other metrics, and obviously losing the only 2 losses to power teams in overtime. But I think resume-wise, it's kind of a head-scratcher.
Well, we've got to go through a few teams here in the A-10 because, Joby, the rest of the A-10 took a hit in terms of its bubble chances. Rhode Island with the loss over the weekend, and I got them on the right there. I'll put Richmond up here on the left as well, suffered a loss. And both these teams were looking like they were on the good side of the bubble, at least as of last week.
Yeah, and you, while not on the good side of the bubble, you still had VCU roaming around in the background too.
Right.
That I think Richmond in particular took. I mean, Rhode Island. All right, this Davidson team is maybe playing what we thought they were. For one game at least, playing like many of us thought they would be preseason. The Bonnies, though, come on. I mean, that's just an awful loss. If you were trying to get into the tournament, right now. Now, both of the question is, did the Atlantic 10 just go from a 3-bid league to a 1-bid league overnight? It might have, except for the rest of the country helped them out, and maybe there's still pathways for 2 because no one was taking advantage. No one was taking advantage except maybe Cincinnati, who was outside to come back in. So in Providence, but that's a like for like, and we'll talk about with Georgetown. This is real trouble for the A-10 because losing, it's one thing if Rhode Island, Richmond beat each other, you're not going to get, or even VCU, you're not going to get a lot of hit over that because the net is so high for all these teams. But now, look at those nets. All those nets were in the 30s. And I think Rhode Island might have been 29 before the weekend. Now it's 37, 49, and if you include VCU, 58. That's not that impressive anymore.
But Titel, what about the Bonnies team? Was that an awful loss for Richmond?
Not as bad as Joby thinks. I mean, they're not making the tournament as an at-large. I'll give him that. But this team lost 3 straight in late January. I was ready to call them done. They won 6 of 7 to get to 18 wins overall. They have 4 winnable games left. The key for them as the 4 seed is obviously you don't want to be the 4 seed and have to deal with Dayton in the semis. They're this close to overtaking Richmond and or Rhode Island. If they can, then they don't have to worry about Dayton until the title game. Top 7 in the rotation, 5 sophomores, 2 freshmen. So it's not just this year that they're a contender. The future is very bright. Sadly, their non-conference schedule is so bad that their best win of the year did not even occur in the United States. It was in Toronto in November. Chad, I forget, who did they beat again?
We're not going to discuss that one. They beat Rutgers in that game. But the week ahead here in the A-10, it's probably the most interesting game. Maybe Davidson at Dayton on Friday night. But it's really a week where Dayton, Richmond, and Rhode Island really should all go 2-0 if you look at these schedules.
I concur.
I guess you got to keep a half an eye on that St. Louis, Rhode Island game on Sunday as well.
Yeah, in a big game Saturday, Chad, that Fordham Joe's game, Stallings Award implications.
Well, let's go. You know what? We actually saw 5 top 10 teams lose over the weekend. We've discussed 3 of them already with the San Diego State, the Gonzaga, and the Baylor losses. The other 2 both came in the Big Ten Conference. Let's head there next. And where we saw both Penn State and Maryland lose, Rocco, on Sunday. Maryland losing to Ohio State, Penn State losing at Indiana.
Yes, we did. And I think, for Penn State, a little bit of a rough week after having all the momentum in the world before the week started, especially losing on their home court against Illinois earlier in the week. I think, the Nittany Lions have kind of showed that they can win the big ones, but they can also lose the ones they're supposed to win. So they're turning into an interesting case study heading into March. I think Ohio State's certainly playing at a much higher level than they were before. They hit a little bit of a wall after the hot early part of the year. Now they're really coming together. You got to believe in Coach Holtman with his track record. Really impressed with that team. And Maryland, they've been the team that's really stood out over the month of February. Now showing a little bit of coming down to earth. It'll be interesting to see how Coach Turgeon responds to that game yesterday, where they were thoroughly outplayed.
Yeah, but beyond that, we still have such a deep conference, whether you want to say it's a 9 or 10 bid conference here, depending on what you think of Rutgers, which I can understand. There's a lot to go here for the Scarlet Knights. But Titel, you got Wisconsin in here also, won the game against Purdue and then beat Rutgers on Sunday.
Yeah, as much as I would like to discuss Joby's favorite team of Purdue, I'll stick to the Badgers. They had the 8-point home win over some team named Rutgers on Sunday, now 17-10. 2 home games left. against Minnesota and Northwestern looked doable. 2 road games at Michigan and at Indiana. They're going to win close games, though. 77% from the line is top 25 in the nation. They had some major issues last month. Kobe King announced he was transferring. They haven't missed a beat. They've won 5 of their last 6 without him. And Micah Potter, the junior power forward, he missed the first 10 games of the year. He was amazing against the Scarlet Knights, 18 points and 9 boards. This guy's 6'10", 248. He's shooting over 45% from behind the arc this year.
Wow.
Just a quick score. It's not on the screen yet as we record. This is it's a couple minutes away from going final. It looks like Illinois is going to pick up one more win against Nebraska. But Joby, we do have 2 very interesting teams that are 500 overall, both Minnesota and Purdue. Titel set you up a little bit, but what about both these teams with those great metrics? Is there still a path for either one of them?
It is all. You've heard it. You've heard me say it, and I am going to stick with it. They desperately need to be 2 games above 500. They desperately. And when you play in the Big Ten, that's not easy. Now, if they make it to that magic 2 games over 500, I will be as big a champion for their inclusion probably at that point as anyone, because look, they got Nebraska for Minnesota, but Minnesota, if they can beat Maryland at home or at Wisconsin, at Indiana, and then, and remember, they have to play in the Big Ten tournament, and a loss in there, a win and a loss doesn't help you if you're not at over 2 games over 500 at that point. You got to win 2 in the tournament, the Big Ten tournament. They're opportunities, and that's precisely why we are still talking about them, why their metrics on the predictive rating are so good. Look at these resumes. They have a zillion losses, a number of good wins, but the losses are all tier 1 for the most part in both cases. Is there a pathway? Yes. Is it likely? It is really tough. It's going to be very tough to make it.
Well, we always say that if you're in a position this where you're a little bit on the bad side, David, it's actually a good thing to have these tough games left, because this gives you a chance to play your way in, as opposed to if you had Nebraska and Northwestern as your last 2 games, you're not going to have that chance to play yourself in as easily.
Right. I would think so. I don't know. While we've never seen it before, and I know that, like at the times where we have seen, what was it, Alabama? What were they, an 8 or a 9 seed last year when they were just a couple games above 500, or maybe it was 3. So, I mean, when you're talking about being on that line, you wonder, with another loss, would they still have made it? I get, categorically speaking, these records aren't good enough, but profile-wise, they still may get a serious look.
And I've got the upcoming schedule here in the Big Ten. It's also a huge, huge week for my Rutgers Scarlet Knights. They're off over the weekend, but they've got a game at Penn State Wednesday. And with the way they've been playing lately, and finally pick up the home loss last week to Michigan, they desperately need this game. And, Penn State has lost a couple in a row. They may have a shot here. They beat them once already, David. That means they should beat them twice, right?
Yeah, Rutgers, I would like – I mean, as much as I don't want Chad to be happy, I would really, really like to see Rutgers get into the NCAA tournament. It would be a really good story. Even if they don't, though, I mean, you have to feel good about the direction this program is going, and I do think that they will get there someday soon, if not this year. But, I mean, it isn't – they don't have the road wins, and they don't really have the neutral wins either. Just beating St. Bonaventure – who we sort of needled you about earlier, would have made a big difference.
Yeah,
one win away from home.
That's why this Penn State game, they pick it up, it changes the entire profile.
Yeah, it does.
Okay, but let's keep things rolling here. And Rocco, let me go back to you as we jump over to the ACC, where right before we came on the air tonight, we saw Florida State knock off Louisville, and it ended up being a 15-point margin of victory, believe it or not.
Yeah, Louisville looked like they ran out of gas there the last couple minutes, but Florida State, tremendous job. Obviously a quality team. They've been hanging around this top 8 area for the last several weeks, and I think they're safely back in there after tonight for sure, despite the rise of some other teams around them in the seed list. I think Louisville, a little bit of warning signs. They've now lost their last 3 road games in a row. I think they've all been either by double digits or really close to double digits. They lost, of course, at Georgia Tech and at Clemson, the last 2 before this road game. So some warning signs for Louisville away from home. Florida State is a long team that gives teams fits. I think they're going to be a real sleeper team to get to the Final Four. Maybe not as much of a sleeper now, of course, but they're going to give a lot of teams fits in the bracket.
Well, and a couple of teams we want to discuss here. First of all, David, go back to last Wednesday. Duke just did not bother showing up on their road trip to Raleigh. It was almost amazing. It was, but then NC State turns around, does lose the game to Florida State over the weekend. I don't know that kills NC State by any means. It's a tough game, but
NC State, they have their warts if you pull them up, but they are right there. I think that they're closer than I think that they're inside the bubble right now. I wouldn't say that they're safely inside. I mean, whenever you're on the bubble, by definition, every game is pivotal. I see they've got games against Maryland, Whiskey, and Indiana.
Give it a second. There it is. At Carolina, at Duke still left. So two tough road
you would have thought Carolina was the trap game that you have to win.
Right. But if they win 3 of those 4, which they should if they're a tournament team, I mean, we're talking about beating sub-NIT teams. I think that might be enough. I think that puts them in.
And Tytel,
we have to discuss a team from this conference.
We'll get there in a minute. But Tytel, I think you want to discuss somebody else that we haven't discussed much this year.
I was ready to kiss the Irish goodbye. They lost by 34 at Duke a couple weeks ago. They've won their last 2 to get to 17-10. Even if they lose to the Seminoles next month, which based on tonight, it looks like they're going to, 3 other winnable games. They could have 20 wins entering the conference tourney. Currently in a 4-way tie for 5th place, along with NC State, Syracuse, and Clemson. As far as a best-case scenario, I think they want to hope for the 5 seed, beat up on a team like Wake Forest in the second round, try to beat Virginia in the quarterfinals, which last year, impossible. This year, they lost in Charlottesville by 1 point in overtime earlier this month.
Missed an open 3 in the final seconds. I mean, it was a real game. They had a shot.
If Louisville has an off night like they did tonight, who knows? John Mooney is the leader of this team, senior power forward, 18 points and 11 boards a game this month. Unbelievable.
I'll tell you the one problem. There's 2 problems I actually have with Notre Dame. First of all, we talked about that versus the board. I got 2-8 versus the board. The wins are Syracuse and UCLA, so they're against the bad side of the board, if that nothing else. Yeah. And you also, Tytel, the non-conference strictest schedule of 308 is cringeworthy if you're talking about the last team in, last team out type of situation.
Right.
Joby, what about your Who's here? I'm going to pull them up on the left side.
They're playing a lot better, and it's all due to one person. Virginia runs better when there are 3 scoring options, realistic scoring options. They've had all year. Diakite has been a solid option all year. Clark can score. So where does it come? Everybody thought it'd be Braxton Key, but the broken hand really has affected his ability to shoot. Then all of a sudden, as I think David emailed during the Louisville game to our group, what in the world is a Wolden Tensai? Well, it's a player who can actually make threes and becomes that third option.
Yeah.
He did it against North Carolina, obviously, in the last seconds. He looked extremely well. He played extremely well at Pitt this week, on the road. So it's not just home cooking in the JPJ. He can, he did it in the Yum Center. So he's clearly got his rhythm going. Don't let the close game against Pitt fool you. Virginia was up like 12 with them 2 minutes to go, and they almost blew it. But it was, Virginia had control of that game. This team is winning. Its defense is with the offense, makes it a formidable team to be in the tournament. And what's funny is I did a kind of a rough bracket today. I think that they might be up to a 9 seed given the weakness of the other 10s, except for BYU, the other teams in that range. Mm-hmm. And they're the last 9. They would play the first 8 in my bracket, which is Texas Tech.
I've actually come very close to that, Joby. Unfortunately, there is a rule that says that they are supposed to avoid rematches from the prior year's tournament.
Oh, that's too bad.
They're probably going to avoid a Texas Tech, Virginia, but wow, what a great 8-9 game that would be if they decided to do it.
It's going to be if Virginia winds up at 10. I think Virginia's in if they win just 2 of their final 5, sort of thing, because they have Louisville and Duke among those final 5. Right. If they win 2 of their 5, they're in. 10 seeds looking very realistic because they'll probably take some losses. Boy, do you really want to be the 7th seed? And then if Virginia wins the 2 seed that then plays Virginia, you do not. It's as as Jay Billis has said repeatedly, it's like going to the dentist. And I don't want, when I'm in the tournament, I don't want to go to the dentist.
Well, we see the upcoming schedule here. It's a big week for Virginia.
You really no avoiding it. You're playing tournament teams.
And the Duke Virginia game Saturday is obviously a huge game. So definitely circle that one. But let's jump over to a conference.
We're not going to talk about Kevin Stoley?
Make it your final thought, David. I know you want to talk about it.
It was remarkable.
David, go ahead. You want to talk about Kevin Stallings?
It's my final thought. Don't ruin it now.
Okay. Then we're going to a conference that we can see something here that has never been seen before this late in the season in Pac-12 history, and that is the Arizona State Sun Devils in sole possession of first place with 2 weeks to go. Titel is in pain over there. Rocco, your team is completely on the wrong end of the standings here, so I don't know what to do here. So you're both in pain. Maybe just go to somebody else for this league.
Well, if you want a Washington fact, they're 3-12 in the league, but they have a positive point differential despite losing 12 of the 15 games. They just beat Cal by 35. They beat USC by 32. And I forget the other one, Beavers by 18.
I think that's the best net I've ever seen for a last place team, quite honestly.
Yeah,
that's better than a lot of first place teams.
Yeah, it's pretty depressing. A lot of blown games late. But let's move on to teams that are good. So Arizona State, unbelievable run they're on, of course. They squeak out a 1-point win over the Beavers over the weekend to follow up a big win, of course, over the Ducks on Thursday, which if you didn't get a chance to see that with Frank Caliendo and Bill Walton, please get on YouTube and watch that. It was amazing. But Arizona State, the beneficiary of some UCLA demolishing in the Mountain that cleared the path for the Sun Devils to now be in first. I think they're the 5th team to be in first this year in the Pac-12.
Yeah, but what about UCLA, Titel? The Arizona State, the hottest team in the conference, UCLA the second.
It's ridiculous. Like, I have no problem with the Wildcats being one game behind in the win column to teams like the Ducks and the Buffaloes. But how on earth do the Bruins have 10 conference wins? I'll tell you, it's because they've won 5 straight. They went to Tucson, they went to Boulder, and kicked butt. They're terrible at defending the three-point line, though. Bottom 15 in the country. They allow 38% from behind the arc. Final 3 regular season games, very tough. Host the Arizona schools, then at USC, their in-city rival. Tiger Campbell, the 5'11 freshman point guard, he must like playing at altitude. He goes to Boulder, 15 points and 11 assists in the 7-point win.
Yeah, and you mentioned USC. That is the team that is falling fast. If somebody's falling apart here, lost 2 in a row now, and a lot of losses starting to pile up here, Joe.
It happens every year. It seems like. I mean, it seems like we've been doing this for a few years. And it seems like every year in February, it's like, wow, USC. They're a solid tournament team. Probably not wearing white, blah blah. And then by the time we get there, they're almost a complete afterthought. They're still on the good side of the bubble, I think, right now. But that doesn't have to hold. Look at what they have left.
All at home,
Arizona State and that hot UCLA team. Yeah, they're all at home. They're all three of those teams are playing better than them right now. So if they could easily go 0-3, and because it would be losses at a home stadium that's really not that intimidating, let's be honest here. All of a sudden, I think they're done. I think you lose those 3 games, you're done at that point.
And this is a real exciting week, though, in the Pac-12. David, with the Arizona teams at the Southern Cal teams, I think all 4 of those games are going to be good ones.
Yeah, they should be. And you got to wonder, what's the vibe around UCLA? There was a lot of disconnect with the fans. Well, there were no fans. I think they'd given up. But, I mean, do they have some energy? And you'd like to see them pack the place for what really are 2 hugely important games. A team that we haven't talked about, and maybe we shouldn't, is Stanford. Or are they so far outside the bubble right now that there's just no way in without winning the conference tournament?
Well, most fraudulent net I have ever seen. Maybe Titel's team.
Yeah, but Titel, I'm still seeing a lot of the bracketologists having them right there first 4 in, first
reading
4
the
out.
net. You see, this is. You can pick out good bracketologists versus bad bracketologists. Real easy here. Ooh, I'm just going to rank teams based on the net. No, that's not how the tournament committee does it.
Let me ask our selection committee guessing expert here, Titel.
Against teams of net.
I think that they're out as of today, but again, the whole point of it, have the advantage of being in a power conference is if you beat Colorado if you win in Eugene, and then beat them again in the conference tourney before losing to hopefully Arizona. Like, that is 20-plus wins total. If they beat Oregon twice or 3 times, how are you going to keep them out?
I will change my tune if that occurs. If that occurs, I will change my tune.
Well, let's keep things rolling here. Let's go to the SEC here. Maybe the standings are coming up. Maybe they're not. There it is. Last week we saw Kentucky go and win at LSU and then also beat Florida. Rocco, I think the Wildcats are finally starting to become the team that we thought they were going to be all season. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah. They're finding ways to get wins. They're not doing it in the most dominant way, but they find a way to grind out wins, and they're a well-coached team, and you got to start trusting the recipe at this point. It's a little similar story that we've seen several times from Calipari and Lexington.
Yeah, and beyond that though, well, actually, Tytel, I think you want to discuss a team that nobody's discussing for a tournament bid. I don't think you want to discuss it for a tournament bid, but where do you want to go with this league?
I want to go to a team that's somehow in the top 7 in the upper half of the conference standings. That's
Okay.
A&M.
They were
11 and 12 just a couple weeks ago. They've won 3 straight. The bad news is their final 4 are brutal. They host Kentucky and Arkansas and go at LSU and at Auburn. Even worse, they have one of the worst losses of any power conference team on their resume. 5-point loss to Fairfield in Florida last December. So they are not getting it at large. Terrible at defending the 3-point line. So we know what Uncle Buzz needs to work on in practice. The good thing he did, he moved junior small forward Quentin Jackson back from the bench to the starting lineup last week. Genius. In 2 games, 19 points a game, 3 steals a game. He's made 19 of 20 from the free throw line.
Joby, I want to ask about one other team here because they're 5-9 in conference yet. I'm still seeing people thinking that this is an NCAA tournament team. What about the Razorbacks?
All right. For those of you, because I actually saw the end of the Arkansas-Missouri game. I don't know why, but I did.
Were your eyes bleeding?
And the SEC, if you ever wanted to hear, this is why conferences should not have networks, because they're paid to promote the conference, not tell reality. Arkansas is a tournament team, there is no doubt, due to this win over Missouri.
Please tell me.
By the way, it wasn't in Missouri. It was in Fayetteville. And these idiots are talking in this gibberish. And you know that Arkansas fans, when Selection Sunday comes, if they kind of, play this beat A&M and Tennessee but lose to Georgia, LSU, let's say they win 3 of their Final 4, because even that they are not in. They win 3 of their Final 4, losing the SEC tournament. There will be Arkansas Razorbacks saying, but the SEC Network guys said that we were going to be in, and we only lost to LSU as a 4 seed or whatever. God, stop it.
Yeah.
Stupid.
Rocco, what does the injury to Joe have effect there?
We'll have to ask the committee members if they let us interview him again. But I think if you look at the 5-game losing streak that just happened, which include 2 overtime losses, they all happened without Isaiah Joe. Isaiah Joe comes back, and sure enough, they beat Missouri in the game Joe we talked about. They certainly haven't performed like a tournament team by any stretch of the imagination in February. But if that is factored in, they're a 16-5 team with a healthy Isaiah Joe, who is a potential all-SEC caliber guy. So this is a pretty interesting case study coming. I think now that he is healthy, they have a game with LSU at home later this at the end of the season. A big Tennessee game coming up. I think they got to still win all these games, and then they can really make a case about that. So just keep that in your keep that feather in your cap.
A couple of interesting games ahead this week. Look for Wednesday night LSU at Florida and Saturday Auburn at Kentucky. 2 really good games to keep an eye on this week in the SEC. Let's jump over to the Big East, David, where this is a conference that suddenly has – are we talking 8 teams suddenly in the Big East?
I don't – okay, I think 8 teams can get there. I don't think they're going to get all 8, but there is a way for it to happen. It's the number 1 overall conference. I know that in and of itself means nothing, but the indicator is there's a lot of teams with strong cases, and there's a lot of teams that aren't just doing that in conference play. I think on average, like everybody in the league played over 3 out-of-conference games against someone that's on the board. So more if you count games against teams like Minnesota, which I didn't when I counted them. So if you want to know why the Big East can do it, it's because of that, like how tough they all scheduled out of conference and how many of them started making cases for themselves even before conference play began.
Yeah, look at those strength of schedules in that column there. That's incredible for a conference.
Take out St. John's and DePaul. You're talking
right
33 or above for 8 of.
Yeah, and you know what though, DePaul made a case for themselves out of conference. It was in conference where they kind of fell apart, which kind of gives you an idea of how good this league is. In my opinion, I know it's only happened once, a team 4 games below 500 getting a bid to the NCAA tournament. But when you are in a league, when literally everybody has played a strength of schedule like that, if anyone's going to do it, it's this league.
And you talk about Georgetown, of course, profiles there on the left with those 3 big Tier 1 road wins, although only one of them is really against a team that's under any serious consideration here.
I give the Creighton win, though, at home. I don't care if it's at home.
Yeah, but the other thing, Chad, is nothing even remotely resembling an ugly loss.
Well, and Joby, let me ask you about Creighton, because I think this is right now the best team in the Big East, and I'm talking over Villanova and over Seton Hall.
They're doing very un-McDermott things, which is
they won it Nova, they won at Seton Hall. How could they not be better than those two?
They're winning in February. Who cares who they're beating?
In February. So, you know what? I think that let's let the season play itself out. They obviously will play Seton Hall down the stretch.
One more game at home, yeah.
So that could switch things. But yeah, this Creighton team has proven that they. When I hinted, hey, San Diego State and better watch themselves because while they're sitting at home and done, there could be a team from Power Conference that could overtake them. Florida State was one of those teams that we're not even talking about. Florida State was one of those teams I was thinking about, and Creighton was one of those teams I was taking out. Their ceiling, they've got to run the table and do a lot, but their ceiling's pretty high. With that, look at the Tier 1 wins. I mean, my goodness! And if they get, if they get Seton Hall, just add another to the list.
Yeah.
A question: I see the wins at Nova, at Seton Hall, at Marquette. Does anybody have 3 road wins against top 25 teams?
And Arizona State.
Arizona State does.
No. Arizona State's another win.
It's a top. Yeah.
Oh, is Arizona State ranked? I haven't seen the poll today.
I don't think so.
Okay, my question was, do they have more road wins against top 25 teams than anybody else? I think they might.
Yeah, I can tell you that they have more road wins against the board than anybody else.
Okay, yeah, all right.
Well, Titel, I've got a bubble team there on the right here with one of the strangest profiles I think I've ever seen in the Providence Friars. I don't know what to do with it when you look at the bad and the good.
So in November, when they had the home loss to Penn, what you should have done with them is throw them in the trash. But somehow they have battled back. Really an amazing story, and they keep getting better, it seems, as the season goes on. They've won 3 in a row against Seton Hall, Georgetown, and Marquette to get back on the bubble. I think they're in as of today, but if not, they're right there. Even if they lose at Villanova to finish the regular season, but still beat Xavier and DePaul, they're 18-13. I'm guessing a 4 seed in the conference tourney, maybe play Marquette in the 4-5 quarterfinal game, who they've already swept. Then maybe a must-win semifinal game against Seton Hall. I don't know. They've been doing it with a veteran court leader, senior point guard Luan Pipkins. Past 3 games, 18 points, 2 steals a game.
Yeah.
What happened during that week in November where in a 6-day span they picked up?
Yeah. I mean, they lost to Penn and Long Beach.
If you throw out from November 13th to November 29th, this is a great resume.
I think you throw out the 23rd through the 29th and you're fine. I mean, a loss at Northwestern. Okay. I mean, Northwestern does have 2 Big Ten wins, I think. So, I mean, they beat somebody.
A couple of things here. First of all, just follow up. Arizona State did not make the top 25. They were actually they were number 26 in the AP poll this week. So by next week, that could be a top 25 win. Rocco, I want to ask you about one other team here in the Big East, though. On the right-hand side, I'm going to pull up the Butler Bulldogs, who we talked about a couple of teams really on their way up. This is a team that I think is imploding at the moment. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, they're not playing well, especially in the heavyweight games when they're playing the Creightons, the Novas, the Seton Halls. I don't think they've been able to beat them away from their home court. Certainly they haven't. Away from Away from home, all they've beaten are a handful of bubble teams that you may say are in or out between Providence, Georgetown, and Stanford on a buzzer beater. But overall, the metrics are strong for Butler. I think they're safely a 6 seed today. I think Lenardi had them a 7. I don't see them being that low at this point. Maybe a couple more losses, and they will. You have to hate that non-conference strength of schedule as well, which we know the committee cares about because they didn't even consider Penn State due to the same reason in the bracket reveal. So there are some concerns for Butler. They may get a bad draw, but they're going to be in the dance.
Yeah, no, I agree. They'll be in the dance, but they've helped put Providence and Georgetown back in the field here by losing.
They're just taking one for the team. I don't
the
see
SEC network thinks that Butler is awesome because they beat Missouri on a neutral floor.
Here's the upcoming schedule in the Big East, by the way, and there's a lot of good games here too. Important games for teams like Providence at Villanova, Georgetown at Marquette, Seton Hall at Marquette also there. Maybe not quite as good of a week as we've seen ahead here, as we've seen for other weeks in the Big East, but still a pretty important week.
Sort of a do not stub your toes. Butler better not lose at home to DePaul game on Saturday.
Yeah.
Georgetown has a lot on the line this week.
Yeah.
A lot.
One last conference, let's try to go through quickly here because we're pretty much out of time. But the American Athletic Association, we saw.
If we're ever going to run out of time, this is the league.
This is the kind, this league is running out of time. But Houston loses to Memphis. Does that put Memphis on the board? Well, Mark, let me ask you: is Memphis back on the board with the win over Houston? Or is Houston just not that good?
I don't think Memphis ever officially left the board. They don't have like the terrible loss that killed them. I know the SMU loss looks bad at home, but they still have an NC State neutral win that gets a little bit better. They've now got a Cincinnati and Houston win. They're staying above 500 in all the quadrants, so they're stacking up okay. And the non-conference strength of schedule is stronger than teams like UCLA and Stanford. So, right now I put them in as the last team today, but it was really difficult to do because I don't think I'm sold on them overall. And ultimately, I think those last couple of bids get stolen as we see championship week play out. But as of today, I think they're really close.
And interesting, with Wichita State and at Houston left in the schedule, they'll definitely have the chance here.
We'll learn a lot the next couple of weeks.
One of the things that could work out in their favor, if you're really big in the mathematics, the committee is going to probably disregard the wins against South Carolina State and UIC, which takes two really bad teams off the schedule and really boosts up their strength of schedule. Wiseman played in both those games.
Tytel, I think you want to discuss the team I pull up on the right here. What about the Golden Hurricane?
So running low on time, I'll just cut to the chase. This team has 2 seniors in the rotation. They've not had a single player start all 27 games this year for a juggling act. Are we talking about, dare I say it, AAC Coach of the Year, Frank Haith?
Oh my God! And who that makes run?
I don't know if
American
that's
Conference tournament. Yes.
Yeah, I don't know if we should congratulate Frank Haith or scold the rest of the ACC. AAC, that is remarkable.
Real quick, Joby, 2 other profiles to pull up here. Cincinnati here.
Cincinnati over Wichita State. I think Wichita State's still in. Rocco, it's interesting, mentioned Memphis as his last team. On my personal, not the J&G, but my personal view, I think Cincinnati is my last team in after that win.
I had Cincinnati as the auto bid because they're in first now, but that made everything even more weird because that put 4 American teams in the bracket. But
and the thing that I liked what Cincinnati did is, it's what I mentioned. If you don't count Virginia as a bubble team anymore, they and Providence were the only ones on the bubble to actually win their games. And the bids are out there to be taken right now. And it always is like that this time of year. Cincinnati, to their credit, went out and said, we want to be included. I appreciate that because a lot of people just look at the Atlantic 10, just wilted under that sort of pressure.
Well, let me take a little bit issue with all of you on that Wichita State being in right now. I look at the Wichita State profile and who have they beaten that is an NCAA tournament caliber team? David, who have they beaten? They beat Oklahoma. That at home, that's their best win?
And that's not a very good win. Oklahoma. I think the neutral floor win over South Carolina might be their best one.
Yeah, the South Carolina is –
they weren't barely on the destruction. But Oklahoma, not the best road team. I know that they might be the best team that they've beaten, but when you look, how hard is it to beat Oklahoma at home? not very.
Yeah, I think you look at those
UConn.
last 4 games for Wichita State. I think they got to win all 4 of them, which includes winning at Memphis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rocco.
I was just going to say, UConn, besides their ridiculous opening game against St. Joe's that they lost at home, that's their only home loss. Besides that was to Wichita State. They've knocked a lot of good teams off at home. So even though hopefully the committee wouldn't overlook that if you're a shot.
They won't. They're zeroed into things like that. At least that's what they told us, and last year they appeared to be. So
there's the upcoming schedule for the American, the big game Sunday, Cincinnati at Houston. That's the one I think we should really need to circle there. But on that note, let's go ahead and pull this down and let's run through any final thoughts here. And Rocco, let me start with you.
Yeah, so I'll just try to do some quick rapid fire. So with Kansas win over Baylor, Azubuike, Tytel made a bunch of great points. He had 23 and 19, completely dominated the Baylor game. He came off of a game where in the first time against the Bears where he only had 6 points. So obviously revenge was on his mind. I also want to throw out there with Nevada hosting San Diego State on the weekend. They haven't lost at home since the early season loss to Utah and USC. They've been flawless at home. It's a very tough place to win. That's going to be a really exciting game. Make sure you tune in. Another thing that came up during the show was right now Minnesota and Purdue, of course, need to get over 500. They don't need the wins. They already have the wins to show that they have a good resume. So one interesting thing is if they finish 11th and 12th, they'll actually get a chance at quote-unquote a free win against the 13 and 14 teams, Nebraska and Northwestern, which could actually help them get into that 2-game over 500 scenario. So just keep that in mind. And then the last point I wanted to make was about Providence. I think if you do have them in your bracket, they stand out so far ahead of the bubble as far as wins go. They have 10 wins over the top 2 quadrants. Nobody from an 8 seed down can match that. And it is a selection versus seeding thing, but if you are going to select the Friars, I think you ought to have them up around a 9 or a 10 seed, not in Dayton.
I agree with that because once you get over the fact that they have those bad losses and you kind of throw them aside, I think you're punishing somebody by putting him that low of a seed, putting them as an 11 or a 12 seed. You'd rather punish a 7 seed with Providence. Joby.
Yeah, well, and the J&G as Providence is the top 10. Yeah, as the top 10 seed, the team right behind Virginia that I mentioned. Chad, pull up the SEC standings real quick. This is a self-promotional component.
Sure. Go ahead. I'll get this up here in a second.
Yeah, sorry. Trying to.
Right.
And the reason why is I want everybody when I pull up, look at Auburn.
Okay. We're getting there. We're getting there. Here in a second.
When we get there, you'll look at Auburn and look at the computer ratings. Focus on the computer ratings there. You'll notice that the resume and the predictive ratings are very different. I would also like to promote the J&G that's probably where they belong on a seed list, whereas no other of the computer ratings are accurate on that. But it just goes to show that it'll be very interesting at the end of the day in that selection committee room. And the reason why is because they won so many overtime games, tight games, et cetera. It'll be very interesting to see what the committee does with predictive metrics that probably are best to say, how a team will do on a given day versus what the team has accomplished or not failed to do, which is lose. Their great record is one of the reasons why they're there. And so this is going to be a good test case for those who are interested about bracketology, et cetera. Look where the committee eventually puts Auburn because I think it will tell you a lot on how a committee thinks in terms of evaluating computer ratings.
Kind of interesting that the polls actually have Auburn right around where maybe they really truly belong, and we very rarely look at the polls in terms of seeding or anything like that. Yeah. Tytel.
So sometimes the timing of our show works out perfectly. Sabrina Ionescu of Oregon just became the first college player to ever have 2,000 points, 1,000 rebounds, and 1,000 assists in your career. Give you an idea of how hard this is. Number one, nobody's ever done it. And number two, I don't think anybody will ever do it again. You need a unique circumstance. You need a great player, obviously, with an all-around game because you can't just be a big man down low. You're getting a double-double. You can't just be a point guard who doesn't rebound. You need to do everything. Also, defense, 1.5 steals per game for a career. She makes free throws 94% from the line this year. She makes threes, a 42% career three-point shooter. And you've got to be on a team that has people who can score when you pass the ball for the assist and who goes deep into the tournament so you can play enough games to get there. An amazing player. I don't know if she's the best college women's player ever, but she certainly has quite the resume. I think the future is so bright. P.S. She started the day at the Staples Center speaking at the Kobe Bryant Memorial, then got on a private plane to go to Stanford. Congrats to Sabrina for an amazing career that continues to get better every day.
Absolutely, got to echo that. And on that, David, I'm going to let you finish off the show. I think you want to talk about some Pitt basketball.
Yes, I have a video or a photo here, but it's not letting me share it. Oh well. But anyway, Kevin Stallings did something amazing this week. He received a 3-year show cause, and the last season they were winless in the AA. Okay, he received a 3-year show cause, and the stated reason was impermissible coaching. Like, he was essentially giving people that weren't counted as coaching duties, which is illegal. His last year, they won 6 games total. They were 0-19 in the ACC, including, the loss in the conference tournament. It was a season that was so bad that you were arguing, Chad, you might remember, that they should actually win the Centenary Award, but since there was just
which is our award for the worst team in D1.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
We decided to create the Stallings Award, which is for the worst Power 5 or non under the radar school. When you watch that Pitt team play, if you watch that Pitt team play, why would you? Nothing. The thought never entered your mind. It's like, man, this team is overcoached. There's just such an abundance of coaching going on here. And the fact that he got a 3-year show cause in a year that they won 6 games, lost every conference game, and had an award named after him to commemorate how bad they were. How much worse would they have been if he wasn't cheating?
They won those 6 games without that cheating. Who knows?
Yeah.
But Kevin Stallings is not that he was going to be coaching again anytime soon anyhow, but he won't be coaching for the next 3 years at least. But on that note, I do want to thank everybody for joining us. On behalf of Joby Fortson, Rocco Miller, you can check him out at braggateer.org as well, John Teitel, David Griggs, I'm Chad Sherwood. We'll be back again later this week with a lot more content, a lot more podcasts, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Yeah.